Hello and welcome to the first panel of the Bioelectronic Medicine Briefing Series. I'm your host, Eric Olander, and we have a fascinating discussion lined up for you today. This is a new virtual event series on the future of bioelectronic medicine, featuring the field's top experts and innovators. Bioelectronic medicine is one of the most innovative fields in healthcare, with perhaps one of the greatest opportunities to grow and deliver new solutions to patients. How can companies, research centers, experts, and others in the field work together to achieve this potential? How can they speak with a unified voice to win over physicians, payers, regulators, investors, and other key external audiences? The Alliance for Advancing Bioelectronic Medicine created the briefing series to explore these very questions. The Alliance is an independent network of professionals dedicated to innovation at the intersection of healthcare and technology. Now, in our first panel today, we'll cover the field's most important recent milestones and its long-term potential. Most importantly, how can organizations in the field collaborate to win over external stakeholders and achieve their shared goals? We have four leading experts to help us answer these questions and to give us an update on the latest developments. Let's begin with some introduction so we can become acquainted with our experts. Doug, let's start with you.
Sure. Well, thank you, Eric. It's really nice to be here. So my name is Doug Weber. I'm a professor of mechanical engineering and the Neuroscience Institute at Carnegie Mellon University. And my work focuses on creating interfaces between machines, such as prosthetic limbs, and the human body. And the goal is to promote seamless integration of assistive devices like prostheses with the body, so patients can, live their lives as if those limbs were just a natural part of their body.
Okay, we're looking forward to hearing more about that. Flavia, nice to have you join us today.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for inviting me. My name is Flavia Vitale. I am an assistant professor of neurology, bioengineering, and physical medicine and rehabilitation at the University of Pennsylvania. And my research focuses on novel bioelectronic interfaces. Really, we are especially interested in the part of the interfaces that directly interact with the brain or the nervous system, so the electrodes. And we apply novel fabrication processes as well as adopt novel materials with the ultimate goal of, as Doug mentioned, realizing a seamlessly interaction between these electrodes and the nervous system, but also integrate multiple interaction and transduction modalities between the electrodes and the nervous system.
Interesting. Okay, Dan, thanks for joining us today. Great to see you.
Hey, Eric, thank you very much. Great to be here. So Dan Rizzuto, I'm the CEO of NIA Therapeutics, and NIA is developing implantable brain stimulation devices that can be used to restore memory function after brain injury and neurodegenerative disease. This is technology that I developed along with my co-founder at the University of Pennsylvania and is based on extensive clinical research in patients undergoing neurosurgical procedures. So yeah, we're very much on the cutting edge of bioelectronic medicine and neurostimulation, and excited to dive in and dig into the details of this field.
Yeah, we're going to do that today. And then finally, Colin, great to have you on the panel.
Pleasure to be here, Eric. My name is Colin Keeley. I'm a physician by training, and my current role is as a VP of Medical Affairs at NeuroSigma, where for the past 5 or 6 years, we've been working on commercializing a non-invasive cranial nerve stimulation device, specifically the trigeminal nerve, for treating a portfolio of neurologic and psychiatric indications. And in 2019, we became the first ever medical device to be approved for treating pediatric ADHD by the FDA.
Interesting. Okay, well, thank you all for joining us today. We're really looking forward to getting into the details of the work that you're doing. But since we're talking to a wide range of stakeholders today, I think it would be a great place to start our discussion by just trying to define what bioelectronic medicine is, since it is such a new field. Doug, let's start with you, but I'd like to go around to get each one of your take on where we are, what it is, and is this a near term or something that is way down the road that you're developing for next generation technology? Doug, let's start with you.
I think it's all of those things, Eric. So the field, or at least the concept of a bioelectronic medicine, has been around for decades, and like to use the cardiac pacemaker as sort of the example of where this field began. The cardiac pacemaker, as I think probably most people know, is a device that provides electrical stimulation of the heart to restore healthy rhythm, to promote rhythm management for the heart. And fast forward 50 years, and now we're working on using electrical stimulation to regulate other organ functions, not just the heart, which is obviously a critical organ. But the same basic concept is being applied. There's some circuit or some set of organs that whose function is regulated, at least in part, by neural circuitry, and signaling in those neural circuits needs to be regulated appropriately to provide appropriate function. And in the case of disease or injury, if that function becomes disrupted, the concept is to use devices that can restore healthy functioning. So,
and that's Dan, that's very helpful. Doug, that's very helpful. But Dan, if you're talking to new investors who are interested in the space but don't really quite understand it, how do you describe bioelectronic medicine to them?
Yeah, I think Doug did a great job at providing the framework. It's the nervous system runs on electricity, and bioelectronic medicine and neurostimulation is a way of interfacing with the body and with the brain in order to provide very much a targeted therapeutic. And Doug's right, a lot of this technology started with the cardiovascular system and pacemakers, but it translated in the late 90s into Parkinson's disease, was the first central nervous system target. So we now have patients with Parkinson's who previously had significant tremor, and it's really incredible to watch these patients in the operating room as the physician turns on what is essentially a pacemaker for the brain, and their tremor relieves and goes away instantly. And you can see somebody who couldn't pick up a glass of water before now take a drink without an issue. And so this has been around now in the heart for going on 50 years, and in the brain for 20 years. And it's a tried and true technology that can bring and restore function to and it is restoring function to millions of patients around the globe. What we're talking about now is branching out and bringing this. The field is really exploding now into new indications. And so we're taking this tried and true technology and branching it out into all these really fantastic new indications.
So that's really exciting. And what Dan's kind of laying out is that some of it's actually working now. But Flavia, is this something that when people are coming new to the space should expect to see in the next 12, 24, 36 months? Is it that kind of technology? Or is it something that we're talking about 10, 15 years down the road, the research that you're working on? Help us understand the time frame of everything.
Yeah, some of those technologies, and as Doug and Dan mentioned, actually have already been translated into clinical practice. Right now, we have patients who are implanted with stimulators in their brain to treat Parkinson's, to stop, for example, epileptic seizures, right? We have also patients who are implanted with electrodes around their nerves, again, with the same goal of suppressing seizures. So tapping into the brain and the nervous system to restore function and treat diseases is already a clinical reality. And there are now a number of technologies in the pipeline that are currently either just being approved or currently under evaluation by the FDA for clinical use. So we are talking about a technology that is a reality, and that it will be available to patients in the next 2 to 5 years. And some other technologies, of course, are more, still being developed. And so they will be probably translated into clinical practice in 10 years. But bioelectronic medicine is a reality. It's not the future, a faraway future.
Wow, it's something
Can
that's
I maybe
absolutely
just
fascinating. Yeah, go
jump in?
ahead.
Because I think, Flavia's work really really aims at addressing some of the limitations of existing technologies that are used for bioelectronic medicine, right? The cardiac pacemaker and the deep brain stimulation devices that Dan mentioned work well. I mean, they have had a profound impact on society. Millions of people are better off because they've because they've had those devices implanted. But those devices don't work for everything, right? That there are other targets that are smaller. There are things we want to do other than electrically stimulate or electrically sense. And our capabilities to do chemical sensing, for example, aren't nearly as good. And so we need multimodal sensing, which is one of the things Flavia mentioned. So Flavia, I don't know if you want to toot your own horn a little bit, but maybe expand a bit on some of the exciting technologies you're working on.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks for the segue. Yes, as Doug mentioned, right, some of the technologies that we have available right now function, but they have limitations. Some of those limitations are related to the durability of the electrode implants, of the batteries. So we need to realize devices that can last longer and that can function more effectively for a longer period of time. Some of these devices, right, are made out of like hard metals, and that they conduct electricity, but our body is soft, is wet, and the electricity in the body is conducted by ions. So there's an intrinsic materials mismatch between these electrodes devices and the body. And there are many researchers like me that worldwide that are now developing or translating new materials into bioelectronic medicine so that we can make implants that can last longer, that are softer, that are less invasive, that the body can recognize actually as a non-foreign, but more similar to its own functions and also materials that it is made out of. And then there are, together with electrical signaling, there's a lot more going on, right? So there are chemical molecules that help transduce those signaling or that communicate in synergy with electrical signaling. There's some mechanical signaling that is going on. And so we need to make devices that can transduce and modulate not only the electrical activity within the body, but also the chemical, mechanical signaling, because those act all in synergy. And we are now looking just at one of those communication modalities. But if we can expand beyond the electrical signaling, I feel that we can not only understand more about the body bioelectrical functions, but actually be more effective into treating some of the disorders that are caused by the dysfunctions in the electrical circuitry.
Okay, and Colin, just before we get into the details in the rest of our discussion, I'd like to get your take very quickly on where we are in this moment, in this question that the rest of the panelists talked about in terms of the near term and the long term and the state of the industry as it is today.
Yeah, I mean, sort of the joke that I like to make is that I'm old enough to remember when bioelectronics was called neuromodulation. So as the other panelists said, this field has been around for some time, but I think that term of bioelectronics didn't come around until sometime in the 2010s. And I don't think it's just about a name. It seems to me to have coincided with when a wider group of scientists, clinicians, and such got interested in the field. So, for example, when I think about bioelectronics, I think about people who are taking advances in microfabrication technology and really miniaturizing, and increasing the sophistication of some of these devices, such as Flavia and her colleagues. So while some of it I think is simply a name, I think it reflects a growing recognition of the potential of the field.
When I hear what you're talking about in terms of the miniaturization, I think nanotechnology. Is there any parallels to what's going on, say, in semiconductor nanotechnology? Colin?
I do not think of current bioelectronic technology as having a lot to do with nanotechnology. I think we're still more on the micro scale, 10 to the 6, -6 instead of 10 to the -9. The professors here are more qualified to talk about that than me. But I think, the short answer is there's not really a need for nanotechnology with the sophistication that we're looking at, right? So, really what we're doing is we are stimulating or sensing, recording nervous system activities. And while I'm sure there are future embodiments where you might want that nano capability, right now, I would say we haven't even come close to exploiting the tools that we have on that more micro scale.
Fascinating. Okay, Doug, this has been really an exciting past year. All the things that have been going on, but this year in particular, we've had nerve stimulation using ultrasound waves, absorbable nerve stimulators, the use of artificial intelligence to diagnose COVID-19 based on cough recordings, and so much more. You've worked on similar advances at a number of premier research institutes like DARPA, Battelle, and Carnegie Mellon. From a scientific perspective, why is now specifically an exciting time for this field? And how would you summarize the potential for someone who's just learning about this space for the first time?
Well, I think most people can appreciate that the pace of technology, innovation, and evolution is like utterly jaw-dropping. I mean, the fact that there's a new iPhone every year, which seems to be twice as good as the one before it, is just incredible when you think about just how rapidly new capabilities are being brought online and brought to the market. In the case of the devices that we work with, the main innovations, or some of the main innovations, are really on the size. We've talked a little bit about some of the extreme miniaturization that has been going on in the field. Going from devices that are cubic centimeters in size to millimeter scale and below. It used to be that the grain of rice was the size standard that everyone liked to benchmark their device against, and we've sort of surpassed that now, and we're talking about dust scale devices. Neural dust is a technology that was developed by a group at Cal Berkeley and is now commercialized as I think arguably the world's smallest implantable pulse generator, right? So the point is, devices are becoming vanishingly small, which by itself is cool and exciting. But the thing that I think is most exciting about the field is that in addition to making devices that are smaller, we're making devices that are smarter. That is, they now have the ability to sense, and not occasionally, but continuously, and across many spatial and temporal scales. So we have devices that are just more aware of the physiology that they're being used to treat. And by accruing that data over long periods of time, we can track changes in a person's physiology. We can better understand how that physiology is responding to the treatment that we're trying to provide, and adapt control over time to be better tuned to the unique characteristics of the individual. So truly personalized medicine that hopefully works better for everyone.
Dan, can you pick up on that in terms of the past year and some of the exciting developments that Doug talked about and what you've seen?
Absolutely. And just to put some fine points, I think Doug laid out the landscape very well. There's two key trends that are converging right now. Number one, Moore's Law. Moore's Law predicts a doubling of computational power every 18 months. This is why the iPhone gets better every year. The software gets more sophisticated, and the size of the circuits become smaller. And then there's artificial intelligence, which is allowing us to gain greater insights into massive amounts of data that are being collected by sensors of all types. The convergence of these two has allowed us to create what are called smart therapies. These are therapies that are able to sense the body's various aspects of the body, of the brain, sensing nervous activity and responding selectively and responsively to the nervous system to provide a very much personalized therapy for each patient. This is something that NIA does in terms of our memory therapy. We develop a therapy that is personalized to the biomarkers of memory in each patient's brain. We develop that through artificial intelligence. There are other researchers at UCSF that are doing the same thing for depression, where the first thing they do is they train, they implant electrodes in each patient's brain, and then they train a classifier, an artificial intelligence algorithm to detect those periods when the brain indicates depressed mood, and the therapy can responsively deliver stimulation as needed to keep the patient out of that regime. So there's some very exciting technologies that are coming out of these two major trends of Moore's Law and AI.
Now, you've mentioned Moore's Law and you mentioned AI, and earlier we've talked about the iPhone. All of those are possible only because there was enough capital coming into the space to fund the kind of research that people like Flavia are doing. Dan, is there enough money coming into this space in order to drive the speed of innovation that you're talking about?
I doubt it. Yeah. I think there's huge amounts of innovation. And if you look at the academic literature, the explosion of new technologies that are being developed every day, it appears, is really incredible. The pace of innovation is only accelerating with these major trends. However, this field is incredibly difficult to commercialize a technology. And so there's a real need for support structures that can help companies get through the minefields that are laying in front of them in order to take one of these academic technologies that has been, de-risked and prototyped and bringing it to market. So, and funding is a key piece of that. I think the other is mentoring and the need to link new entrepreneurs with more experienced hands who have done this before. Because as I mentioned, there's a lot of minefields and any one of them can take you off the field permanently. So there's a real need for that expert feedback and those mentors to assist getting these technologies to commercialization.
Cullen, let's get your take on that in terms of the cross-pollination, the mentoring, and the capital raising, and all the issues that Dan raised about. And how are you seeing those challenges?
Yeah, no, I think that is a very good question that really does go to the heart of, where this industry is going to be 5 or 10 years from now. So I do not believe there is enough capital in this industry. And I think if you just look at the numbers, the publicly traded biotechs that are preclinical or don't even have an FDA approved product. The amount of capital those companies are raising just dwarfs what is going into this industry. And why that becomes a problem is because I've seen a lot of bioelectronic medicine companies come and go, seen their pitches and things like that, and a lot of them it is the efficacy of the drugs without the side effects. And I'm guilty of it because that's, we at NeuroSigma are going after a traditional pharmaceutical indication, ADHD, right? And so I believe that is true about our product. We can provide the efficacy of the drugs without the side effects. But the other part of that is that once you start comparing yourself to pharmaceutical treatment, in a way you're binding yourself because to generating a comparable data set to those pharmaceutical treatments, right? So what I mean is, for example, in the ADHD space, there are two new non-stimulant medications coming out in the near future, and both of them have 2 phase 3 trials, almost of 1,000 patients in both cases, right? I cannot think of a single bioelectronic therapy ever that has come anywhere close to presenting 1,000 patient data to FDA, right? And yet still many are approved. But why that becomes a big issue is because then when you go to sit down with the people like CMS, the insurance companies, the payers, it's a difficult case to make of why you should make my market access the same as you should make a drug's market access when the data sets that we're coming to them with are just so much smaller. So that is a big issue, in my opinion, that is holding back this field, and that it's not one that's easily solved. I mean, somebody needs to really break through and show, like, look, you can make as much money off of these as you can off a successful pharmaceutical or biotechnology product, and then that will be a signal to the market that more capital is warranted. But so far, we are still kind of waiting for that, frankly.
Yeah. Well, you brought up ADHD and also CMS. And so let's kind of stay with you, Colin, here and talk about your company, NeuroSigma, which you recently won a CMS billing code for a breakthrough treatment in pediatric ADHD. What do these developments tell us about the state of the industry? And are we approaching a turning point where we will actually be able to make the transition that you're talking about in terms of taking these technologies and actually making them available to patients so that we can get the returns on investments that would appeal to more investors to get into the space?
Right. I do think we are close to a turning point. I'm not trying to be all doom and gloom about it, but I think what I just said is an honest sort of assessment of the field. So yeah, we did just go through CMS, and we were successful in having them issue 2 new, they're called HCPCS or HCPCS codes for our product, which is, that's a big win for us. So, CMS is typically closely guards issuance of new codes because they don't want to be in a position where every new medical device that comes out is automatically awarded these new codes. They want you to try and fit into their old coding system. So that I do see that CMS has an internal mission to facilitate innovation, and they acknowledge to us on multiple occasions that they view bioelectronics as one of these sources of innovation in the healthcare field, and they're trying to work with companies like ours. So while, anytime you're dealing with, a large bureaucratic system, it's going to take some time. And our process with CMS did take about 18 months or even a little more in total, but it wasn't a bad experience. Everyone I dealt with there was always very reasonable, and ultimately we got a good answer. So I think the next step for us is to go take these codes to the private insurance companies and start negotiating reimbursement levels for our products, so that when people go and fill their prescription, just like they would with a medication, that is covered and reimbursed for them just as a medication would be.
Dan, just coming back to you, based on what we heard from Colin and some of the comments made earlier about some of the difficulties in raising capital, you have the benefit of being in an industry that none other than Elon Musk has identified as an industry that he's interested in. And typically, where Elon Musk goes, a lot of people follow. Now, is Elon Musk's interest in this space a help, or is it a hindrance?
I think it's definitely a help. It's the rising tides lift all boats type of an effect. And he's bringing awareness to the field. I think so. It's definitely got people's attention. I think you're seeing investments in bioelectronic medicine on a regular basis. Colin is also right that there's not nearly enough funding in this sector to support all of the amazing technologies that could be brought to market. I also think he's right that the gears of CMS are going to play a big role here. And you've seen him and NeuroSigma gain new codes for bioelectronic medicine therapy. You also have seen CMS just recently finalize their rule for covering breakthrough device therapies as soon as they're approved by FDA. I can't overstate the importance of this rule, which allows really breakthrough, innovative technologies to become reimbursed immediately upon receiving FDA clearance. This is going to be, and it just happened in the past couple of months. I don't know that we've seen the first therapies actually gain coverage yet, but I'm hopeful that this will have a big impact on the market, because this is what it needs, right? Investors will come when the success stories start presenting themselves. We need big success stories in the field. That's what's going to drive investors. And in order for that to happen, we need coverage from the payers, and the CMS rule is a big step in the right direction.
Doug and Flavia, we've heard from Colin and Dan on the corporate side and on the investor side. For you on the academic research side, are you also seeing the same difficulties in times channeling, say, funding, and in this case, maybe funding from foundations and government or from private industry? Are you seeing the same trends that they're seeing on the corporate side? Start with you, Flavia.
So actually, there is, since President Obama launched the signature brain initiative, there has been in the federal funding, in federal agencies first, and then foundations and private or funding for academic research, actually an increasing interest, awareness, and funding available for research in bioelectronics. And actually, I am one of those researchers who were in their trainings when this President Obama launched his brain initiative, and so I was fortunate enough to grow as a researcher in the field, right where everyone had the attention started to focus on research in bioelectronics. So I think that there is definitely funding available. Of course, it's never enough, and hopefully there should be more, especially in those areas where there's still from private foundations and private funders more focused on traditional medicine, right? We need to make them understand that bioelectronics can be useful beyond the brain stimulation for Parkinson's disease. And there are actually so many other diseases that could be treated by correctly tapping into the nervous system and controlling its function. So there are HDDs, even like hypertensions, inflammatory disorders. So it's a lot more than the brain and the nervous system.
And what's the interest at Penn in terms of the pipeline of graduate students to see if they're interested in the space? Because this is not going to be an industry that will take off unless you have the researchers like yourself and a pipeline of them coming through. Is it difficult or is it easy to attract students into the space?
It's actually easy because there are brain-computer interfaces. So the attractor for them is, or the keyword is like brain-computer interfaces and the brain stimulation. But brain-computer interfaces is definitely very, very appealing, right? They think about making a person move a robotic arm just with their thoughts. And of course, now with like players like Elon Musk in the field who talks exactly about this applications, right? Students and postdocs are definitely extremely interested in the field. When they dive a little bit deeper into the type of research that we do and understand that actually bioelectronics, again, is a lot more than the brain stimulation and the brain-computer interfaces and prosthetics. They actually start to appreciate the broad applicability of this type of treatments, as well as all the new frontiers that we can really explore with breakthrough research. And luckily, in the past, there wasn't really the pipeline after their graduate studies, right? Like, where would they go to get their first job beyond Medtronic? Now, luckily, thanks to people like Colin and Dan, there are Neuralinks, there are a lot more potential job opportunities also for students after the completion of their studies, which is an additional a point that we can attract talent into the field of bioelectronics.
And Doug, what are you seeing over at Carnegie Mellon?
One of the things that we pride ourselves on is really working kind of across departmental and even college boundaries to take a collaborative approach to addressing problems in science and engineering. And this is an area where such an approach is absolutely critical, right? Dan touched on the, AI and the importance of AI in these emerging technologies. We absolutely need to have computer science experts working side by side with neuroscience experts to understand the anatomy, the physiology, the data, the signals that are being generated, and all, in both of those groups informing the device engineers that are going to create that next generation of system that will, hopefully deploy soon. So, I think these transdisciplinary approaches are critical. They're a hallmark of bioengineering programs around the country. Going back to the question about funding, as Flavia mentioned, the BRAIN Initiative has been a huge boon to the field. Many of us on this call or in this meeting have benefited from the funding that has come out of that. And thanks to President Obama for having the vision to get that started. But in addition to that program, NIH has also launched the SPARK program, which is similar in sort of vision as the BRAIN Initiative, but it has a specific focus on peripheral nervous system interfaces, which for many of the applications we've been considering, and the one that NeuroSigma is now championing, peripheral nerves offer just a tremendous opportunity for treating many really critical diseases. And so the SPARK program has provided very generous funding to academic groups and even companies to develop new therapies for new bioelectronic medicines for the peripheral nervous system.
Flavia, Doug talked about the importance of the transdisciplinary collaboration and cooperation. Your work at Penn and with the Penn Brain Science Translation, Innovation, and Modulation Center has built a network of neuroscientists, psychiatrists, engineers, and other professionals. What benefits have you seen from this type of cross-disciplinary collaboration, and how can you think it can help build credibility and awareness in the space?
As Doug mentioned, the field of bioelectronic medicine is intrinsically interdisciplinary, and we need experts in all fields of engineering, neuroscience, and medicine. One of the key elements of that can help us really bring the bioelectronic medicine to patients is putting the clinicians on our side, putting them in the loop, right? And so getting technicians involved since the very beginning, since the ideation phase, even actually talking to them to understand what is the unmet need, what are the issues that they face every day when they treat their patients, and what are the things that they cannot do, but they would love to do to help improve their patients' lives. And so by talking to them, we can then as engineer understand what are the tools that we can develop to help technicians address their patients' need, and then work with clinicians to test, validate, and continuously refine, right, the technologies. Because at the end of the day, they will be also the adopters of the technologies. So it's extremely important to be in collaborative and multidisciplinary environments. Like I'm so lucky to be at Penn because it's one of those places where engineers can work side by side with scientists and clinicians in developing these technologies.
Colin, it really makes sense in the academic and research space to have these multidisciplinary collaborations, but talk to us about what's going on in the private sector and in the corporate space.
Oh, it's absolutely the same thing, and I totally agree. That is one of the most exciting things about this space. I think, earlier in this conversation, I mentioned how, from my perspective, a lot of people who maybe 30 or 40 years ago would have been involved in the semiconductor industry or electronics hardware, those type of people with those interests are stepping back and saying, okay, we've got all these interesting microfabrication tools and techniques. How can we start integrating that with biology? And I do believe that is the future of medicine in general. I think, sort of as Flavia was alluding to earlier, that goes beyond bioelectronics, that you start to think about creating a micro environment to achieve a desired biological effect in a way that current devices or pharmaceuticals or biotechnology products just don't do. So I also think another very interesting thing that's come along in the last, say, 5 or 10 years is improved transcutaneous power delivery. So for many years, if you had a rechargeable implantable pulse generator, the only way you could do it was by basically, hooking up a coil to a coil where, you're really transmitting electricity just across the skin. But there have been some new developments by people who I don't truthfully understand these things very well, but they're now to the point where some of these, rice-sized implants can be transcutaneously powered at a distance of centimeters or inches. And that also is a very exciting thing, because it gets back to what we were talking about earlier with the peripheral nerves, where now you can insert these very small things on a peripheral nervous system that can both stimulate and record, and you don't need some huge battery. You can transcutaneously power it in a non-invasive way. So I do think there's a lot of exciting stuff going on, but it is going to take some time to get there.
Okay, well, in terms of those timeframes, Dan, I'd like to come back to you, because your company, Nira Therapeutics, is working on a neuromodulation for memory restoration technology. You recently completed a round of fundraising, and you've been recognized as a high potential startup by Neurotech Reports and the University of Pennsylvania. From your viewpoint, with an earlier stage company, what audiences do you see as most important to accelerate your company's growth? And what do you say to investors or others who might see memory restoration as somewhat unconventional, futuristic, and maybe even sci-fi?
Yeah, so I think financing is one of the biggest risks of starting an entrepreneurial endeavor in bioelectronic medicine space, the neuromodulation space. There are lots of sources of risk, but financing, getting the enough capital to get to market is one of the key ones to overcome. And you have to be able to develop the long-term relationships with investors. It can take time to develop those relationships to unlock the funds. And I think in terms of your comment about the technology being revolutionary, far out there, it feels far out there. The ability to restore memory function, right? That it seems incredible. But as I pointed out before, we're creating a revolutionary technology on top of just an evolutionary change to these existing technologies that have been around for 20, 30, 40 years, right? Pacemakers have been around for 50 years. Deep brain stimulators for Parkinson's have been around for 20 years. Not that many people know about it, but it's true. Cochlear implants for deafness have been around for 30 years. We have hundreds of thousands of patients walking around now who couldn't hear before and can now hear after having a cochlear implant to restore their hearing. So we've seen this happen before. I think disseminating these stories, publicizing them, making, if every company had a Michael J. Fox, it would be a lot easier, I think, because that's what we need is patients to tell these stories of how these technologies have helped them and help get the word out and communicate the importance and the successes in the field.
I guess I'm curious, listening to what you're saying, Dan, about the moment that we're in right now in terms of what we've seen with the development of COVID vaccines. I mean, this has been just unbelievable technology that brought together vaccines that normally take 4, 5, up to 10 years to build in some cases. And they were able to do it in under a year. And it sounds like the speed of technological development, like what you're talking about, we saw happen in COVID. And I'm wondering if the experience that we've all gone through over the past year in COVID, watching almost in real time people build these vaccines using state-of-the-art technology, moving very quickly, makes it easier for you to have these conversations with fundraisers to say, see what can be done if we just have the motivation and the attention put to it. But at the same time, we also unveiled a lot of ambivalence in the society at large about the speed that they use to build those technologies. Are they safe? Are there ethical issues? Are there moral issues involved in some of these technologies? So a lot of things come together as a result of what we've gone through with COVID and watching the vaccine development. How does that come to bear in your conversations with investors and various stakeholders in the corporate space?
You know, to be quite frank, I haven't had a lot of those conversations around COVID. I think there's been some exciting developments in the regulatory space that might have gone unnoticed by much of the public or even people who have been in the space. But the evolution of Bayesian optimized clinical trials, where you can actually change the paradigm of your clinical trial as data comes in, has really, and this has taken a while for the FDA to gain acceptance and to gain comfort with this type of a new approach to running clinical trials. But it offers the possibility of combining multiple phases into a single clinical trial, which has the opportunity to shave potentially years off the pathway to market. And this can make the difference between, a successful product and an unsuccessful product. So, I think those types of innovations have been slowly coming to bear and being taken advantage by the market. So I'm confident and hopeful that these types of innovations will continue to occur.
And Colin, have you seen any impact from COVID, in terms of just the environment that we're in on the work that you're doing in this sector?
I can't say that the COVID has directly affected us other than the way it's affected, everyone throughout the world. But I think what Doug and Flavia both mentioned about Obama's BRAIN initiative, as well as the Spark initiative at NIH, in my mind, there's a very similar parallel to the Human Genome Project in the 90s, right? So I think one of the things that is so great about the United States is our federal government's commitment to invest long-term in research and development, particularly in the biological sciences. And I would argue that if it's not exactly a straight line between the Human Genome Project and, a year to an mRNA vaccine for this pandemic, there is certainly something there. I feel very confident that the DNA-based technologies that were developed as a result of that basic science investment did pay off. But you can see, you're looking at a 20-year cycle. So while I think these, as we started talking about at the beginning, these maybe dumber is not the right word, but the sort of more basic neurostimulation technologies have been around for a long time, I do believe, as Flavia and Doug sort of intimated, that these heavier investments by the federal government, they are going to bear fruit, but R&D is not easy, and it does take time.
Yeah, and Doug, do you get the sense that the Biden administration is as committed to this as the Obama administration was with their funding support?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think we're already starting to see a bit of a a welcome return to the Obama days with regards to some policy. I mean, I think there's a little bit more on the table right now in terms of national crises that need to be addressed, not only with the pandemic, but the racial justice and injustice issues that just haunt us daily, it seems. So, certainly the attitude towards and recognizing the importance of basic science and engineering research is a good thing, and so I expect the next 4 years will be favorable. But I did want to make kind of stress one important point about what this field I think might need or might benefit from, and that's really a focus on mechanisms of action. There's a lot of exciting technology. Everyone gets excited about their new iPhone and this, a new electrode or a new implantable stimulator. But some of the more maybe critical but less sexy innovations are in understanding how the biology actually works and how it responds to the devices that we're trying to use. Because without that, without that deep understanding of what goes on inside your body when you stimulate a specific target, we're left guessing about how to make devices better. And when you're trying to convince a payer or a patient or a physician why they should use this therapy over, some new drug that might be coming into the market, if you can't point to a circuit diagram or point to a piece of data that shows how, this part of the body responded when we changed, stimulation current applied to another part, you're always going to be sort of stuck hand waving to try to explain what the benefits of your technology. And I think about everything, from an engineer's perspective. And, if I don't have equations that I can write that describe the dynamics of my system or the input output properties of the system, it's hard to know where to start. It's hard to actually do the engineering process if you don't know what you're working with. So again, the fundamental research is really critical to supporting the engineering efforts that our companies are focused on and that our patients and physicians want to use.
So in your view, it's the basic research, this basic R&D that you and Flavia are doing that are key to kind of propelling in the industry. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, basically, Flavia and I are doing really important work, and we should get more funding. That's what I'm saying.
Yes, okay.
I concur.
I'm sure that Flavia agrees with that as well, right? And you should get raises too, of course.
Totally.
I mean, I couldn't agree more, but I also want to make another point in addition to the extremely important point that Doug just mentioned. So we need to fund basic science. We need to understand why these things works and what are the knobs, right, in the nervous system that we can turn to control the function and treat disorders. But we also, and this is absolutely totally not sexy research, but we also need to work on materials and packaging, understand, develop a unified set of protocols to understand how these devices, all the components age in the body, what are the primary mechanisms that cause the failure of the device, what are the materials that can improve the lifetime and functionality of those devices. And again, it is not, it might not sound as the latest frontier in the in research in bioelectronics, but is extremely important to actually realize the true potential of these technologies. Because if those devices are not reliable, no one will want to implant them in their patients.
Right. Well, Flavia, let's stay with that topic and talk about the bridge from research and academic centers actually into patient care, getting this technology into people's bodies to help them. How can the field accelerate the translation of cutting edge research advances into wider adoption and meaningful benefits for people in healthcare systems?
So we definitely need to demonstrate the benefits of those devices. Colin mentioned before about developing electroceuticals, right? Devices that work like drugs, but without side effects. I think that we need to educate people, patients and clinicians on the true benefits of those devices and why, and also we need to educate the insurers, right? These devices are expensive. They might be more expensive than traditional treatments, but there are long-term, hopefully potentially long-term benefits in implanting a device in a patient, because again, if we can make devices that are reliable and durable, there will be one cost, but that's higher at the time of the surgery and the implant, and it's the cost of the device. But then there won't be all the costs associated with the drugs and potential side effects and the hospitalizations and complications related to those side effects. So there's definitely education that we can do as researchers to patients and clinicians and private insurers to make them understand the future benefits of the bioelectronic technologies.
Do you think there's a challenge, Flavia, in persuading patients about the safety of this, in terms of a lot of people are skeptical now about the big technology companies, about all of the eavesdropping and the spying in our data and all of this surveillance that we're on? And now that we're going to have technology in our bodies that will communicate potentially out to databases and servers, does that raise some issues that we might have to overcome in terms of being able to reassure people that this technology is not only safe, but it's also your identity and your data will also be safe, that it collects?
We need to demonstrate that the data, the people's data, is safe and is transmitted, managed, and stored safely. There are a lot of ethical concerns, right, and considerations that we have to make around again, this type of devices and the information that they have related to the personal information of the patients. And I'm in the first, I want to make sure that those safety measures are in place and that we can safely handle people's data. But once we are convinced, I think that we will be also able to convince patients that it is safe to have those devices. Again, recording, managing, transmitting the information.
Colin, Dan, I'd like to get your take on that, on the ethics and the data security aspects of it. Colin, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it actually, for me, it gets into a little bit more about digital health is where I see the near-term issues there, because I think maybe for people who aren't familiar with the differences, I think all of us here in bioelectronics, we're talking about, generally therapeutic devices. But one of the things that has happened over the last 10 years is the rise of so-called digital health companies. And generally what these companies are more focused on are software-based platforms that can be therapeutic, and many of them are going after things like psychiatric diseases, things like that. But also fundamentally, they are about collecting patient data and then mining and analyzing that data for insights that might not have been possible with smaller data sets or less sophisticated analysis. So in the near to medium term, I think there are significant issues with those digital health platforms. And truthfully, I don't know how that's going to play out. I don't think any of them have achieved sort of the mass adoption scale that we sort of, it's still sort of an open question as to how widely those things will be used and adopted. But a lot of people seem to think that it is the future. I will say that.
And Dan, how do you address this issue when it's brought up with investors and other stakeholders in terms of data security?
Yeah, it's a crucial conversation, and we've taken it incredibly seriously. I think more generally, companies in this space have to act ethically from the very beginning, and they have to demonstrate trustworthiness to consumers, to patients. And unfortunately, a single bad apple can have ramifications industry-wide. But I'm seeing encouraging signs. Companies like Facebook that are developing non-invasive brain-machine interfaces for communication have started integrating ethics into their R&D programs. That's something that just happened this year, which I was very happy to see. From Nia's perspective, our first hire was a cybersecurity expert. And this is a non-traditional choice for a neurotechnology company, a brain stimulation company, because most people would have an electronic engineer, given the importance, the traditional importance of hardware. But again, looking to the future in bioelectronic medicine, we talked about sensors and sensing brain and biological data and selectively personalizing the therapy for each patient. Those data collection is key, and making sure that we're protecting those data sets is also key. Making sure that these devices cannot be hacked. Nia is bringing not only a next generation therapy to the table, but we're bringing next generation cybersecurity standards to the table as well.
That's interesting. Yeah, the cybersecurity part is absolutely fascinating. I'd like to close our discussion to get a perspective from each of you on where the opportunity is, what the next 2 to 3 years look like. Give us your near-term or medium-term view of the future and what roadblocks need to overcome. So Doug, let's start with you and then we'll make the rounds.
Okay, well, I already made my pitch for more fundamental research. Maybe I'll just extend that further to say that I think we're now at a point where, because there are so many new and exciting companies like Neurosigma and Nia entering the market, we now have more technologies to work with that are actually human ready. And so there's an opportunity for physiologists to work with companies that are testing new products to actually do fundamental research in humans. So as part of the clinical trial where you're examining outcomes, you're also trying to better understand the physiology that you're working with. And so my friend Kip Ludwig likes to talk about this as reverse translation, where you're on the translation pathway, but you're looking backwards to try to understand why a device is working or not working as it may be. So that's where I see there's really exciting opportunities.
Okay, Flavia, what would you like to see the field accomplish in the next 2 to 3 years?
I alluded before. I think that the researchers, the regulatory bodies need to come together and come up with a set of standards that we can use to test, validate these devices in all of their components. Talked about degradation. So what are the tests that effectively assess the durability of the devices and each of its components, of their components? Right now, every lab uses a different type of experiments or characterization tools, and we need to come together to really come up with unified standards. So that's one thing. And then personally, I would like also to see some of those innovations in the materials and transduction modalities to accelerate in the development and translational pipeline, right? So we now all agree that metals and traditional materials are not, as I mentioned, the best to interact with the nervous system. And there have been a lot of exciting innovations coming from different labs worldwide in novel materials that that are safer and that can better perform their functions in interacting with the nervous system. we need to push them a little bit, closer to the patient, and to also make people like Doug and Colin understand that, or wanting to try to use these new materials in their devices, because there are benefits, and the regulatory bodies are ready to evaluate these novel materials into bioelectronic devices.
Okay, Doug and Colin, we're going to close with you guys. Doug, let's start with you. Next 2 to 3 years, what's ahead?
I think you mean Dan.
Oh, Dan, sorry.
So I'm very much looking forward to new smart therapies being brought to market. It's been a while. I think it was 2014 or so, maybe 2011, NeuroPace had the first smart therapy for epilepsy, where they actually had an implanted neurostimulator that selectively responded and delivered therapy when the patient was about to have a seizure. And that's been incredibly beneficial for thousands of patients with epilepsy. Closed loop therapy but they were early, and smart therapies, closed loop therapies have not yet hit the prime time. So I'm very much looking forward to this. Of course, NIA is working on a closed loop therapy for memory restoration. Saluda Medical is developing a closed loop neurostimulation platform for pain and spinal cord stimulation. And there are many other closed loop platforms being developed. That, I think, that's the future of neuromodulation, and also bioelectronic medicine as well, that ability to personalize the therapy for each patient. And that's what I'm very bullish on moving forward.
And Colin, you're going to get the last words. What are you bullish on? What do you see in 2022, 2023, 2024?
Sure. Yeah, I agree with Dan. The closed loop therapies, sensing and stimulating, you're going to see more and more of that. I think it's increased miniaturization of the devices. Again, transcutaneous power transfer is a big thing for the industry. I think you're going to start going after peripheral nerve targets. I think you're going to start targeting indications that are traditionally pharmaceutically treated indications. And I would hope, given the company that I work at, NeuroSigma, that you're going to see minimally invasive, non-invasive therapies really start to achieve scale. That's what I'd like to see from the industry, is scale, thousands and thousands of patients using these therapies.
Well, I want to thank you all for taking the time to join us to help better understand where the industry is going and all the exciting developments that are underway. And so we'll look forward to talking to you later on, maybe next year, to get an update on all of the progress that you guys are making. Thanks so much.
Eric,
Thanks,
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Bye.
Have a nice night.
Okay.